Scripture reading today comes from Matthew chapter 7, verses 9 through 11. Matthew chapter 7, 9 through 11. Or what man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him?
Some of you know the name Leo Tolstoy. He's the guy that wrote War and Peace, the book that nobody reads, and everybody refers to. And say because it's just this monster of a book, but I guess it's really good. I don't know if any of you have gotten around to reading it, but he's a pretty famous writer. He was a Russian guy, relatively religious man, and when he was younger, he told about this story about when he was younger, and he and his brother went camping. I didn't think people went camping clear back then, but I guess they did, and he had made it a habit well into his 20s to actually every evening kneel down and pray, just like he did when he was little. And his brother was kind of watching him, and all he said was, "You still do that?" And Leo Tolstoy said it was like this wall had been shoved down, and it really damaged his religion for quite a while, I guess, because of what his brother said. He felt embarrassed. He felt kind of caught off guard that, he thought, this is kind of silly, isn't it? And I think a lot of people think of prayer that way as kind of this child thing that people sometimes grow out of. You probably have the image, of a little boy or a little girl kneeling beside their bed saying, "Now I lay me down to sleep," or, "Please bless mommy and daddy," and it kind of becomes this thing for children, and we grow up. And for a lot of people, it kind of fades to a minimal thing, maybe once or twice, maybe before a meal and maybe at church, and it kind of fades. And I think it's because we have a lot of trouble understanding prayer. We have a tough time with it. There's a lot of reasons we don't. If you ask the average person, in fact, I would probably be the one who would mention this one and say, I just run out of time, or I don't think about it. I get so busy living my life, I don't stop to pray many times. Or I've talked to people thinking, I think I'd pray more if I felt something, if you could actually see your prayers going up through the ceiling, or some kind of warm, fuzzy feeling. I think people would maybe have a tendency to pray more. But maybe some people feel like it's a childish thing, kind of a cute thing to do. I think the real reason it kind of fades on us is we don't really think it makes any difference. Not really. I don't think we really believe that it makes any real difference, because if we really believed that prayer made all the difference in the world, we would make the time. We would find the time to do it. It would be one of the main things that you got done tomorrow. I know you have your plans tomorrow, but that would be at the top of the list if we really understood what prayer was. But prayer fades not because it stops working, it's because we don't understand it a lot of times. And we think of it in oversimplified terms and say, if I get what I want, then prayer works. If I don't get what I want, it doesn't work. It's like a vending machine. It's that simple in a lot of people's minds. We have a lot of distorted ideas about prayer. I found a good example of it. I'd heard about this, but I looked into it a little more detail. This gives you an idea of kind of the distorted idea that we sometimes have about prayer. New York Times did an article in 2006. It was a medical study, and the medical study was designed to test the effectiveness of prayer. So as 1,800 patients in 6 different hospitals were recovering from heart surgery. And so the researchers asked 3 denominational groups to pray. St. Paul's Monastery in Minnesota, the Community of Teresian Carmelites in Massachusetts, and Silent Unity, a prayer ministry in Missouri. And they said, we want you to pray for these patients. Here's their first name and the first initial of their last name. And please include the phrase, for a successful surgery with a quick, healthy recovery and no complications. They broke the patients into 3 groups. So 3 groups of patients. Group 1, and 2 were prayed for. Group 3 was not. Half of the patients that were being prayed for were told that they were being prayed for, and the other half were told that they weren't told one or the other. And it was described as the most scientifically rigorous investigation of whether prayer can heal illness. Researchers found no differences. One thing they did notice, patients who knew they were being prayed for actually had a higher rate of complications. Because they knew, and the only theory, and you understand what I'm saying, is that the people, when they found out what they were being prayed for, they actually did worse. And the only thing that researchers could figure out is that maybe they had some kind of performance anxiety and be like, okay, I've got to do this and be good. One doctor said it may have very well made them uncertain, wondering, why am I so sick that they're calling in a prayer team? They're kind of worried. So it actually affected the results in that regard. They actually published this study in the American Heart Journal. And a lot of debate were among the doctors who maybe we shouldn't tell patients that they're being prayed for because it makes them do worse. Just the fact that people approach prayer this way shows the world has a really distorted idea of what's going on. And if we're not careful, either this kind of thinking or other world ideas can creep into our minds and corrupt our perspective, make you doubt. Sometimes we're hesitant to be too bold about our prayers, and maybe deep down we suspect that it might not work. And for some, it comes down to a simple question: when I pray, do I get what I asked for or not? It's a very simple question. One thing I think would help is to remember that prayer is a limited privilege. The general consensus is that anyone in any circumstance can pray, and that prayer will be accepted by God. Now, God is aware. He's completely omniscient, very aware of everything that's going on, hears every prayer, but he does not necessarily accept every prayer. And that, I know that doesn't go over that well, but it's important to know that about prayer. Isaiah 1, look at a couple of verses in Isaiah, tells us a little bit about prayer. I think we're very quick to say, oh yeah, it's all good. As long as you pray, God will accept it and will listen to what you have to say. He's very aware of it, but there are limitations. It is a limited privilege. Isaiah 1:15, he uses some pretty harsh terms. He says, so when you spread out your hands in prayer, I will hide my eyes from you. Yes, even though you multiply prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are covered with blood. Don't make the mistake of thinking, well, the blood indicates just murder. It's just talking about sin. The guilt of sin has cut them off from the privilege of prayer. If you go to Isaiah 59, you'll notice unforgiven sin cuts off this privilege of prayer. Isaiah 59, starting with verse 1. And notice this captures the idea, it's not that God is incapable of knowing what's being prayed in your prayers, but whether or not it's accepted. Behold, the Lord's hand is not so short that it cannot save, nor is his ear so dull that it cannot hear, but your iniquities, in other words, sins, have made a separation between you and your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you so that he does not hear. For your hands are defiled with blood and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken falsehood. Your tongue mutters wickedness. Notice there's the image of blood here, but it's not murder. It's just lying and other sins involving words. That disconnect eliminates the privilege of prayer. In fact, in 1 Peter 3:7, we're warned that husbands better be careful how they treat their wives, to treat them with honor, because your prayers can be hindered, is how it's described there. So if you want to understand prayer, it's kind of important to know it's a limited privilege. Just because they got a bunch of religious people together and said, okay, everybody pray, and we're going to measure and quantify the results, shows a wild misconception of how prayer works. This time of year, one of the unfortunate side effects is that everyone is okay as long as they believe in God. And you sing some carols and you be nice and you're good to go, and God will hear your prayers. And it's a hard truth to know otherwise. Until your sins are removed, there's a separation between you and God. And it's important to emphasize this in order to understand prayer. But in order to understand prayer, you have to understand God. And there's two things that if you know this about God, it'll help you understand prayer. First of all, God really loves you way past what you think he does, way past what you imagine. And if you want, he will be your father. That's the other thing that's important to know about prayer. So first, he loves you way beyond what you imagine, and that he wants to be your father. To show this, look at Matthew 7 again. Jesus is making some bold statements about prayer. He doesn't water it down. He doesn't hold back. Matthew 7, verse 7, very famous passage. Seems pretty straightforward. Jesus says, ask it, it'll be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and who seeks finds, and him who knocks, it will be open. Seems pretty simple. Ask for something, you get it. Can you imagine if prayer, if there wasn't, now you'll notice I've stopped because there's some more coming here. Can you imagine if that's all that prayer was? It's so much more than that. That'd be a terrible arrangement. You get what you want. There's an old curse, you've probably heard it before. May all your wishes come true. It's an old curse. Can you imagine? God loves us too much for that arrangement. I know all of us can think back to things that we're grateful for that we did not get. And at the time, it was something we really wanted. We thought, if I could just have this, life would be so great. Matthew 7, Jesus has more to say about prayer. It's not just, give me this and I get it. I want this. It's like a relationship between a father and son. See, that really helps clear things up. Matthew 7, verse 9. Chris read this for us. Or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? So sometimes we treat prayer with caution because I think we're hesitant because of maybe we're afraid that it's booby-trapped, that if we ask the wrong way or that God will kind of trick us, kind of like a bad genie or something. I remember seeing a television show where this guy said, okay, I wish for peace on earth, and he woke up and everybody on the planet was gone. And that was the answer to his wish. I think we kind of treat the, prayer that way, and it's so easy for it to become superstition, almost kind of a form of OCD where you have to have certain phrases mentioned, and if you don't mention everybody, maybe they're going to be in trouble and they're in danger because you didn't say their name in prayer. We kind of get silly, almost like a talisman to ward off evil. That's not prayer. We don't talk to God to just keep bad stuff away. There's more to that. It's a father and son relationship, a father and child relationship. And Matthew 7, he goes on to describe the situation. He says, okay, you got a father and a son. And the son says, can I have some bread and fish? And the father says, okay. And he gives him some bread and fish. And notice after that it says, and the reason is because the father loves the son. It's important to remember that. So here's what won't happen. Son's going to say, can I have some bread? And the father says, here you go, and gives him a stone. Or the son says, can I have a fish? And his father says, here you go, and gives him a snake. So what if he did do that? What could you conclude? Can I have some bread, please? And here's a stone. Or I'd like some fish. Here's a snake. It would tell you something about the father. Maybe he's out of bread and fish. This doesn't work because God's supplies are unlimited. And ironically enough, he fed thousands of people with bread and fish. So that's not an issue. Could be a joke. Probably some dads, how dads are. They can think they're funny, and maybe here's a snake and here's some bread. Here's a stone. Since we're dealing with the seriousness of prayer, it's probably not that. We can rule that out. Or maybe the father misunderstood. So I thought you said snake. Sorry, but that's not going on either. Romans 8:26. This is really important to know about prayer. See, that can't happen in prayer where something's lost in communication. In Romans 8:26, in the same way, the Spirit also helps our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we should. You catch that? It hit me right between the eyes. We do not know how to pray as we should. We don't know how. We're not good at it. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. So there's no possible way of miscommunication. One of the best things about prayer, even if you can't express everything the way you want, nothing is lost in translation. It's beyond the words. God knows exactly what you mean. Even before you start praying it, there's no misunderstanding. But that kind of brings up something startling. If prayer is really about what's going on in your heart and it's far more than the words, then if your prayer is just words, there's no heart there, we start to see the problem. Prayer is not just a bunch of people rattling off religious phrases and then measuring the results. If there's no heart in the equation, that's not prayer. If your prayers are made only of words with none of your heart, there's not much going on there, and that could explain quite a bit. It's like getting a gift, maybe you got a gift recently, it runs on batteries, and you don't put batteries in it, and you complain because it doesn't work. So excuse me, well, yeah, but did you put your heart, is your heart in there at all? Or are you just rattling off words? Praying without your heart, that's not prayer, it's not going to work. So here's some things we know about prayer. According to Matthew 7, asking you'll receive. That's the basic arrangement. On top of that, there's no miscommunication, according to Romans 8. But keep in mind, according to Matthew 7, it's like a father and son relationship. But notice Matthew 7 and verse 11 goes on, tells us a little bit more. It says, okay, there's you as fathers, and then there's me as a father. If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? So you parents, why do you give your children things? Because you love them. Why do you not give them everything they ask for? Because you love them. You say, don't you want to give them things? No, you don't want to give them things. You want to give them good things. And this passage makes things much more clear. It says, you being evil know how to give good gifts to your children. When you give something to a child, it might be something they want, might be something they need, like socks. But it's something that's safe. And how much more will God do the same? But another reason we have trouble with prayer, and this is something this was on my mind because we talked about this a little bit last week in Bible class, says if you ask for a fish, he won't give you a snake. But I think here's one of the problems. What if you ask for the snake? We have a knack for wanting things that hurt us. When the world has more influence on us than the Word does, we have a tendency to ask for the snake. So, of course, God's going to say no. It's kind of funny. You say, I asked for a snake and I asked for a stone. Didn't get it. Prayer doesn't work. That's when prayer gets confusing, is when we ask for the wrong things. James 4 even addresses this. James 4 verse 2. We ask for the wrong reasons. Notice how God puts us in James 4 verse 2. He calls them on a lot of things, but he talks about what they ask for. He says, you lust and you do not have, so you commit murder. You are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. You adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. So the first problem he mentions here is you don't have because you don't ask. We don't pray. Not real. Not for real, your heart's not in it. It's kind of what he seems to be indicating. And then you ask with the wrong motive. And it can all be traced back to friendship with the world. The world is shaping our thinking more than the Word is, and you can see it in our prayers. And we go to God with a worldly mind. Probably I can see it in myself because I think one of the biggest symptoms, it just now occurred to me, is my first thing in my prayers is what I want. I rarely pause to thank Him for what I already have or just to honor Him. If we're not in our Bibles, we are corrupted by worldly ideas. So the problem with prayer is not prayer itself. The problem is with the one praying. I share a story with you, and it's kind of mean, but I guess it's a true story, and it makes me think of me. Tech support story. You've probably read some of those. And this guy calls, and he says, my computer won't come on. He says, okay, well, check this out. He was on, the tech support guy was with him for a while. He says, okay, well, go back, look behind the computer and check and see if this wire is connected. And he says, I can't really do that. He says, why? He says, it's too dark back there. He says, well, turn on the light. He says, I can't, the power went out a while ago. And so the tech support guy was very calm. He said, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, do you still have the box that the computer came in? He says, yeah, I got it. He says, okay, you need to box up the computer and take it back to where you bought it. And he said, really? Is it that serious of a problem? He says, yeah, you're too stupid to own a computer. So that's kind of mean, and I'm not trying to be unkind, but if there's a problem with prayer, it's not God. It's not Him being difficult. The problem is on our end. If a son asks for a fish, the father will not give him a snake, but if the son asks for a snake, and then gets a fish, it's kind of silly for the son to turn around and say, wow, prayer doesn't work. One of the best things to know about prayer that I'm very grateful for is sometimes you don't get just what you ask for. And it's not necessarily because of bad motives. Don't get me wrong, just because things are not necessarily playing out like you hope they were through your prayers. It's not necessarily because you have bad motives all the time or that I do. It's because you're dealing with someone who's the best gift giver of all. Prayer is this great thing, and once we get our end of the line unconfused, something else about prayer that's great. Briefly, a good example is 1 Kings 3. Remember Solomon was taking over as king, and God tells him in 1 Kings 3:5, he says, ask what you wish me to give to you. He gives him a blank check, basically. Solomon, whatever you want, it's yours. So Solomon wisely considers all the responsibility before him, and so he prays for wisdom. This is in verse 9. He says, so give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, to discern between good and evil. And it's a very godly prayer, and God is pleased with this prayer, and he does something unexpected. Notice what God does in 1 Kings 3, verse 12. Behold, I have done according to your words. You prayed for it, and I'm going to give it to you. Behold, I have given you a wise and discerning heart, so that there has been no one like you before you, and nor shall one like you arise after you. I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there will not be any among the kings like you all your days. When Solomon prayed to God, God gave him what he asked for and what he didn't ask for. Another great thing about prayer, sometimes you get what you ask for, plus things you didn't ask for. It's almost, I don't know if things have happened to you. So this is great. I wished I'd prayed for this. If I'd known this was on the table, I would have asked for it. Ephesians 3:20 assures us that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond all that we ask or think. God has much bigger plans for you than you do. One last thing before we wrap up the lesson. One of the worst concepts about prayer, and it kind of goes back to that medical study where those people were kind of stressing out and say, wow, I must be in bad shape if they're asking for prayers. Prayer has been demeaned to the point of just being kind of a routine before meals, or if you're in big, big trouble, the final act of desperation. All we can do now is pray. I think of it this way. I don't know if you ever had a friend lock themselves out of their house. So pretend you get the call. Say, I've locked myself out of the house. So you go over and you spend hours trying various things. You look for their missing key. You look through the car, try all kinds of windows. Hours go by, none of it works. And after trying that, you're standing there at the door and your friend says, you know what? My father is next door and he has a key. You think we should ask him? Yeah. That would have been maybe the first thing to think of. But, well, my father doesn't always do what I want. He has a tendency to do what's best for me. Who cares? Let's go. Let's go talk to your father. Same reasoning with prayer. We try everything. First we worry. We scramble to fix it ourselves. We call in favors. We rack our brains. And then if everything else fails, it's like someone say, well, I know we've got this situation. Let's try this, this, and this. I do have a personal relationship with the Creator who spoke everything into existence and has a tendency to do what's best far beyond all that you hope and dream. You want to try that? Yeah, it'd probably be a good thing to try. Prayer seems kind of confusing, and the problems are all on us. Prayer works fine. But first we need to make sure things are right between you and God. Until that sin problem is handled, there's a disconnect. And to fix that, being baptized in the blood of Jesus will remove that separation. And if you haven't been baptized, we want you to know that opportunity is available. You could come forward even right now if you wanted. We're singing this song of encouragement in a moment. That opportunity is always available. Those of us who are Christians, it's important to remember what our relationship is with Him. He is not a vending machine. He is our Father. And if we neglect that relationship, then we will not have a good communication, and our prayers can be damaged and distorted by worldly ideas. He communicates to you through his word, and you communicate to him through prayer. And that dialogue is very essential every day. Once we understand him better and examine what we ask for and why we ask for what we ask, that line of communication can improve. But all this leads to a really important question. What if it really works? How's it going to change things for you today? You're going to suddenly find time? I'm going to take the time. Talking about it with you is reconfirming on my mind. This is for real. Prayer is a privilege that's accessible to Christians. It's an incredible privilege. How's that going to change things for you today and maybe tomorrow? It makes for some very exciting possibilities, and it's something for all of us to consider as we stand together and sing.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word.